When we examine the human body carefully, without exaggeration and without marketing noise, we discover something very important. The hour after dinner is not an ordinary hour. It is a decisive metabolic window. What you do during those 60 minutes quietly instructs your body to either store energy as fat, particularly around the abdomen, or begin managing that energy efficiently. Most people underestimate this period because the effects are not dramatic in a single month. But physiology does not operate on drama. It operates on repeated signals. After you finish dinner, your digestive system becomes highly active. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose and released into the bloodstream. In response, the pancreas releases insulin. Insulin is not an enemy. It is a necessary hormone. Its role is to help move glucose from the blood into cells for energy. However, insulin is also a storage hormone. When glucose exceeds immediate energy needs, insulin signals the body to store the surplus. A significant portion of that storage, especially when repeated daily, ends up in adipose tissue, commonly around the belly. Now consider what typically happens in many households. Dinner is followed by sitting. Screens are turned on. Physical movement drops to almost zero. In some cases, people lie down within minutes. From a metabolic perspective, this sends a powerful message. Energy intake is high. Energy demand is low. The body responds logically. Stores, the hour after dinner represents a fork in the road. During this time, blood glucose is elevated. Insulin is circulating. Cells are ready to absorb nutrients. If light muscular activity is introduced, even something as simple as a relaxed walk, muscle contractions begin using glucose directly from the bloodstream. This reduces the amount of glucose that must be stored. Insulin levels stabilize more efficiently. The metabolic environment shifts from storage dominant to utilization supportive. Research in metabolic health consistently shows that post-meal movement improves glycemic control. It does not require intensity. In fact, extreme exercise immediately after a heavy meal is neither comfortable nor necessary. The key variable is activation. Muscles act like sponges for glucose when they contract. Even low-intensity movement increases glucose uptake independent of insulin. That means the body can manage blood sugar more effectively, reducing the prolonged insulin exposure that encourages fat storage. There is another layer to this hour that is often ignored: circadian rhythm. The body's sensitivity to insulin changes throughout the day. In the evening, insulin sensitivity tends to decline compared to earlier hours. This means that large evening meals combined with inactivity create a high likelihood of storage rather than burning. Therefore, the post-dinner window becomes even more critical. It compensates for this natural decline in metabolic efficiency. Furthermore, late evening behavior influences overnight fat metabolism. During sleep, the body shifts toward repair and recovery. Growth hormone is released, supporting tissue maintenance and fat utilization. However, if insulin remains elevated due to excess calories or inactivity, fat burning during sleep is. By managing the hour after dinner wisely, through light movement and avoiding additional food intake, insulin can return to baseline more efficiently, allowing nighttime fat metabolism to function properly. Many people search for complex solutions: supplements, detox plans, severe calorie restriction. Yet they ignore this predictable, controllable hour that repeats every single day. 60 minutes may seem insignificant, but multiplied across weeks, months, and years, it becomes a defining factor in abdominal fat accumulation. We must also consider inflammation and stress. Even psychological stress after dinner, intense work, emotional conflict, overstimulation from devices can elevate cortisol. Chronically elevated cortisol has been associated with central fat deposition. A calm, structured wind-down routine during this hour supports hormonal balance. This is not about superstition. It is about endocrine regulation. The principle is simple but powerful. If every night includes light movement, no additional food, and nervous system relaxation, the pattern gradually shifts toward balance. This does not promise overnight transformation. It promises directional change. The scale may not dramatically drop after one evening walk, but blood sugar control improves immediately. Insulin exposure shortens. Bloating may reduce by morning. Over time, abdominal fat becomes less resistant. The hour after dinner is not magical. It is strategic. It is a daily opportunity to influence hormones, blood glucose, and energy partitioning. Ignore it and storage dominates. Use it wisely, and your metabolism begins working with you rather than against you. When a person sits or lies down immediately after dinner, it may feel harmless, even deserved after a long day. However, from a physiological standpoint, this habit quietly promotes fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. The body does not interpret rest after eating as comfort. It interprets it as a signal, and the signal is clear. Energy intake has occurred, and energy demand is minimal. In that environment, storage becomes the priority. To understand why this matters, we must look closely at what happens inside the body after a meal. As food is digested, carbohydrates break down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. Blood sugar rises. In response, insulin is released. Insulin's role is to transport glucose into cells for energy or storage. If muscles are active, they immediately use some of that glucose. If muscles are inactive, which is exactly what happens when someone sits or lies down, glucose utilization drops significantly. The body then shifts towards storing the excess. Now consider the abdominal region. Belly fat or visceral fat is hormonally active tissue. It is particularly sensitive to repeated insulin exposure. When insulin levels remain elevated for extended periods, fat storage in this area becomes more likely. Immediate inactivity after dinner prolongs the time glucose stays elevated in the blood, which keeps insulin circulating longer than necessary. Over weeks and months, this repeated pattern contributes to fat accumulation around the midsection. Many people assume that fat gain only depends on how much they eat. Quantity matters, yes, but timing and behavior after eating also play a decisive role. Two individuals may eat identical meals. One moves lightly afterward. The other lies on the couch. The metabolic outcomes will not be the same. Inactivity reduces the body's ability to clear glucose efficiently. As a result, the storage pathway dominates over the usage pathway. There is another factor, digestion efficiency. Gentle movement after eating helps stimulate gastrointestinal motility. It encourages smoother digestion and reduces bloating. On the other hand, lying flat too soon can slow gastric emptying and may increase discomfort or acid reflux. While this may seem unrelated to belly fat, chronic digestive sluggishness can contribute to feelings of heaviness and abdominal distension, which many people mistake for stubborn fat. The body functions best when circulation and muscle activity assist digestion, not when gravity and stillness dominate. Even beyond glucose metabolism, total energy expenditure plays a role. The body burns calories through basic metabolic processes and physical activity. After dinners, if a person becomes completely sedentary, calorie expenditure drops to its lowest level of the day. Meanwhile, calorie intake has just peaked. This creates a metabolic imbalance. High intake, low output. The body, designed for efficiency, stores what it does not immediately need. It is important to clarify that rest itself is not harmful. Sleep is essential. Recovery is essential. The issue is not resting. It is the timing of complete inactivity immediately after. A brief period of light movement before full relaxation makes a measurable difference in blood sugar control and insulin dynamics. Studies on post-meal activity consistently show improved glucose clearance, even with slow walking. The body responds quickly to muscle contractions. Muscles act as metabolic engines. When they are idle, fuel accumulates. There is also a behavioral dimension. Sitting after dinner often invites additional eating. Snacking while watching television, sipping sugary drinks, or consuming desserts becomes easier when one is stationary. Movement, even minimal, disrupts that cycle. It creates a psychological boundary that signals the end of eating for the day. Without that boundary, excess calories frequently follow. Over time, the combination of elevated evening insulin, low movement, and repeated calorie surplus contributes to increased fat storage efficiency. The body adapts to patterns. If every evening follows the same routine, dinner, couch, screen bed, metabolic flexibility decreases. Fat oxidation during the night becomes less efficient because insulin has not returned to baseline promptly. Gradually, abdominal fat becomes more resistant to reduction. This is not about fear. It is about awareness. Small habits repeated daily create large outcomes over years. The body does not suddenly decide to store belly fat. It responds to repeated hormonal signals. Immediate inactivity after dinner strengthens those signals. A short period of gentle movement interrupts the storage cycle. It lowers post-meal glucose more rapidly. It shortens insulin exposure. It slightly increases energy expenditure. Individually, each effect seems minor. Collectively, performed every night, they shift the metabolic balance. When people say their belly fat feels stubborn, often the explanation lies not in extreme dietary failure, but in subtle, consistent behavior. Eating or lying down immediately after dinner appears harmless, but metabolically it tilts the scale towards storage. Awareness of this simple pattern is the first step toward reversal. Insulin spikes after meals play a central role in determining whether energy is used efficiently or stored as fat. And this process has a particularly strong connection to abdominal fat accumulation. To understand this clearly, we must remove emotion and look strictly at physiology. Insulin is not a harmful hormone. It is essential for survival. Without insulin, glucose would remain in the bloodstream and cells would be deprived of fuel. However, the way insulin behaves in response to modern eating patterns can significantly influence belly fat storage. When you eat dinner, especially a meal containing carbohydrates, those carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. Blood sugar rises. The pancreas detects this rise and releases insulin. Insulin acts as a key, unlocking cells so glucose can enter and be used for energy. In an ideal metabolic environment, glucose enters muscle cells, liver cells, and other tissues efficiently. Blood sugar returns to normal and insulin levels decline. But the body operates on priority. If immediate energy demand is low, such as during inactivity after dinner, muscles do not require much glucose. When muscles are not actively contracting, their demand for fuel decreases. As a result, more glucose remains available in the bloodstream. The pancreas responds by releasing more insulin to manage. If glycogen stores in the liver and muscles are already sufficient, excess glucose is converted into fatty acids through a process called de novo lipogenesis. These fatty acids are then stored in adipose tissue. Here's where the abdominal region becomes important. Visceral fat, the fat stored around internal organs in the abdominal cavity, is particularly sensitive to hormonal signals, including insulin. Repeated elevations in insulin encourage fat storage in this region. Unlike subcutaneous fat, visceral fat is metabolically active and strongly influenced by endocrine patterns. Chronically high insulin levels, especially in the evening, create an internal environment that favors central fat accumulation. Another key factor is insulin resistance. Over time, frequent insulin spikes, particularly from large, refined carbohydrate-heavy meals, can reduce the sensitivity of cells to insulin. When cells become less responsive, the pancreas compensates by producing even more insulin. This creates a cycle. Higher blood sugar leads to higher insulin, which promotes greater fat storage. Abdominal fat itself can worsen insulin resistance, creating a feedback loop that makes belly fat more difficult to reduce. Even if calorie intake remains moderate, repeated sharp insulin spikes can shift how the body partitions energy. Energy partitioning refers to whether calories are directed toward muscle repair and immediate use or toward fat storage. When insulin is elevated frequently and for long durations, fat storage pathways are favored. The body becomes efficient at storing energy rather than burning it. Evening insulin spikes are particularly influential because of circadian biology. The body's insulin sensitivity is generally higher earlier in the day and lower at night. This means the same carbohydrate-rich meal may produce a higher and longer-lasting insulin response in the evening compared to the morning. When dinner is large and followed by inactivity, insulin remains elevated for extended periods. During this time, fat burning is suppressed. The body cannot efficiently oxidize fat while insulin is high because insulin signals the body to store, not release energy. This suppression of fat oxidation extends into sleep. Many people assume that the body automatically burns fat overnight. While this can happen, it depends on hormonal conditions. If insulin levels remain elevated due to late meals or additional snacks, The body continues prioritizing glucose management rather than fat burning. Over months and years, this subtle nightly pattern contributes to abdominal fat retention. It is also important to consider meal composition. Highly refined carbohydrates and sugary foods produce sharper and faster insulin spikes compared to fiber-rich, balanced meals containing protein and healthy fats. As the stronger the spike, the stronger the storage signal. Repeated exposure to high glycemic meals amplifies this effect. However, even balanced meals can lead to prolonged insulin elevation, followed by complete inactivity. The goal is not to eliminate insulin. That would be neither possible nor healthy. The goal is to prevent excessive and prolonged insulin elevation. Gentle post-meal movement, portion awareness, and balanced macronutrients all help moderate the spike. When insulin rises moderately and returns to baseline efficiently, the body maintains metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between burning glucose and burning fat. Belly fat is not created by a single meal or a single insulin spike. It is the cumulative effect of repeated hormonal patterns. The body adapts to what it experiences regularly. If insulin rises sharply every night and remains elevated to inactivity or additional snacking, the abdomen becomes a preferred storage site. If insulin rises moderately and falls efficiently, fat storage pressure decreases. The process is biochemical, not mysterious. Insulin is a storage regulator. Its pattern of elevation determines long-term fat distribution. By managing meal timing, composition, and post-meal activity, the intensity and duration of insulin spikes can be influenced. Over time, this reduces the hormonal signals that promote abdominal fat accumulation. Understanding this shifts the focus from extreme dieting to hormonal balance. When insulin behavior improves, belly fat reduction becomes more achievable, not because of magic, but because of metabolic alignment. Light walking after dinner may appear too simple to matter, but metabolically it is one of the most effective actions a person can take to improve blood sugar control and reduce fat storage pressure. The power of this habit lies not in intensity, speed, or duration, but in timing. When walking is done shortly after a meal, it interacts directly with digestion and glucose metabolism in a way that no supplement or shortcut can replicate. After dinner, blood glucose naturally rises as food is broken down and absorbed. The question is how quickly and efficiently that glucose is cleared from the bloodstream. When a person remains seated or inactive, glucose relies almost entirely on insulin to enter cells. Insulin does its job, but it does so at the cost of increased storage signaling. The longer glucose remains elevated, the longer insulin stays high. That extended insulin exposure favors fat storage and suppresses fat burning. Light walking changes this process immediately. Muscle contraction activates a separate glucose uptake pathway that does not depend entirely on insulin. When muscles move, they pull glucose from the bloodstream directly to meet energy demands. This lowers blood sugar more quickly and reduces the amount of insulin needed to manage the meal. In practical terms, this means less hormonal pressure to store fat. What makes walking especially effective is that it recruits large muscle groups, legs, hips, and core, without creating stress. These muscles have a high capacity for glucose uptake. Even slow walking increases energy demand enough to make a measurable difference. This is why walking outperforms sitting still. Even when the walk feels almost effortless, the body responds to movement, not exhaustion. Another advantage of post-dinner walking is improved insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity refers to how responsive cells are to insulin. When muscles are active, they become more sensitive, meaning they require less insulin to absorb the same amount of glucose. Over time, repeated walking after meals trains the body to handle carbohydrates more efficiently. This reduces insulin spikes not only after dinner, but across the entire day. Walking also helps regulate digestion. Gentle movement stimulates the digestive tract, improving gastric emptying and reducing bloating. When digestion proceeds smoothly, nutrient absorption becomes more controlled rather than erratic. Sudden spikes in blood sugar are less likely when digestion is steady. This contributes indirectly to better glucose control and reduced fat storage signaling. Importantly, walking after dinner does not interfere with recovery or sleep. Unlike intense workouts, which can elevate stress hormones and body temperature late in the evening, light walking has a calming effect. It supports circulation without overstimulation. This balance is critical. Elevated stress hormones, particularly cortisol, can worsen insulin resistance and encourage abdominal fat storage. Walking lowers stress while improving metabolic outcomes. There is also a behavioral benefit. Walking creates a natural transition between eating and resting. It marks the end of food intake for the day. This bound reduces mindless snacking, which often occurs when people sit down immediately after dinner. Even small additional snacks can significantly increase evening insulin levels, especially when combined with inactivity. Walking helps close the eating window without relying on willpower alone. From an energy balance perspective, walking modestly increases calorie expenditure at a time when calorie intake has just peaked. This does not mean walking burns off dinner. That idea is misleading. What walking does is improve how calories are handled. It shifts energy partitioning away from storage and toward usage. Over time, this improves body composition even if body weight changes slowly. Consistency is where the true impact appears. One walk will not transform metabolism overnight, but walking after dinner 5 to 7 days per week compounds its effects. Blood sugar control improves. Insulin exposure decreases. Fat oxidation during sleep becomes more efficient. Abdominal fat gradually becomes less favored as a storage site. Many people avoid post-meal movement because they believe rest aids digestion. Complete stillness, however, is not a digestive advantage. The body evolved to digest food while moving. Gentle walking aligns with natural physiology. It supports circulation, digestion, glucose control, and hormonal balance simultaneously. The simplicity of walking often causes it to be dismissed. People search for intensity, novelty, and complexity. But metabolism responds best to predictable, repeatable signals. Light walking after dinner provides one of the clearest signals possible. Energy has arrived and the body is active enough to use it. Over months, this habit reshapes metabolic patterns. It reduces the likelihood of glucose being converted to fat. It shortens insulin exposure. It improves sleep-related fat metabolism. None of this requires strain or sacrifice. It requires timing and repetition. In the context of belly fat, walking after dinner is not a bonus habit. It is a strategic one. It works not because it is extreme, but because it aligns perfectly with how the body manages energy at the most vulnerable time of day.